The Lantern Vigil, the Hill of Stars. On the western coast of Eriu, where the cliffs leaned over a sea of soft lead and white foam, there was an ancient path the shepherds avoided at dusk. It was not a dangerous road. There were no hidden drops, no treacherous stones. It was rather a path of silence. Sheep lowered their heads when they passed it. Dogs slowed their pace, and the wind, which elsewhere amused itself among the heather, seemed there to speak in a lowered voice. On one side of the path grew twisted hawthorns. On the other stretched a sweep of wet grass scattered with small, late flowers, the kind that keep their color even after summer has already retreated into memory. Beyond that stood the woodland of ash, rowan, and hazel, where crows nested in the high branches and squirrels ran like flashes of copper shadow. At the boundary between that forest and the plain rose a circle of grey stones. Some stood taller than a man, others barely showed above the moss. Each one was marked with worn lines that the morning sun made look like old silver. There, for many winters, lived the small druid community of Knockna, Realt, the Hill of Stars. It was no great sanctuary. No kings came from distant lands, and no famous bards arrived to recite genealogies. It was a simple place, remote, and for that very reason beloved by those who knew how to listen. That was where Eowyn was learning. He was still young. His hands were the slender hands of someone who had spent more time among herbs, bowls, and bark tablets than among axes or plows. His dark hair always seemed rain-touched, even on dry days. He walked carefully, as though afraid of disturbing the earth. And when he spoke, he did so without haste, though still with the faint uncertainty of someone who had not yet fully settled into his own voice. He had spent 3 years as an apprentice under the guidance of the druid Muiren, a woman with clear eyes and such a serene gaze that many villagers lowered their voices without realizing it when they stood before her. Muiren did not teach harshly, nor did she teach with indulgence. She taught the way rivers teach stones, returning again and again with patience until the right form appears. After a certain time, each apprentice was given an object to keep for the span of a full cycle of seasons. It was not a possession, it was a companion in study. A plain mirror, a yew branch, a bronze bell, a pruning knife, a consecrated cloth for covering smaller altars. At the beginning of autumn, Eowyn was entrusted with a lantern. It was not a large lantern, it was made of dark hand-worked iron, with small knots in the metal that resembled roots curling around faintly green glass. At the top was a copper ring, already worn smooth by other fingers. The flame inside did not need frequent oil because in certain rites it was fed with blends of resin, wax, and dried herbs blessed under the waning moon. "This is not a light for finding roads," Muiren told him as she placed it in his hands. "It is a light for remaining." Eowyn accepted the lantern with both hands. "Remaining where?" Muiren barely smiled. "Where no one wants to stay for very long." That answer stayed with him for days. At first he thought she meant the clearings where the dead were watched before burial, or the huts of the sick where the air thickened with fever and pleading, or the shores where certain women went to weep in secret. Because in those lands, as in all lands, there were places the body remembered as if they held cold even in summer. But the lantern did not behave like the others. Its flame did not rise when the wind stilled, nor shrink when drizzle fell. Instead, it sometimes glowed more softly when entering a sorrowful house, or turned more golden when someone spoke a name they had avoided for a long time. Eowyn noticed it, though he did not yet dare say so aloud. One afternoon he accompanied Muiren to visit an old fisherman who had lost his brother at sea 2 winters earlier. The house was low with a rush roof and a constant smell of salt, damp wool and ash. The man spoke little. He offered sour milk and sat beside the fire without drinking it. Muiren did not try to comfort him. She simply remained there. She listened. She let silence do its work. Eowyn held the lantern while its light brushed the fisherman's large hands, cracked by years of labor. For a moment it seemed to him that the flame was not illuminating the whole room, but one precise place only, the emptiness between one sentence and the next. On the way back to the sanctuary, Eowyn asked, "Can a light see what someone keeps silent?" Moiraine walked a few steps before answering. "Not as we see, but it recognizes the place where something hurts." "And what does it do then?" "It does not tear it out. It does not judge it. It stays near." That night, from his coarse wool bedding, the boy looked at the lantern hanging beside the entrance of the apprentice's hut. The flame barely trembled. It seemed to breathe. Loch Chiar. The days passed, then the weeks. Autumn pressed deeper into the hedges. The apple trees gave their last fruit. The roads began to smell of wet leaves and turned earth. Eowyn carried the lantern into the forest at dawn, to the huts at dusk, to the stone circle when ancient names were recited, and little by little he began to feel that the object weighed differently depending on the day. Not more, not less, just differently, as if sometimes he were carrying metal and glass, and other times some ancient presence he still did not understand. There was, however, one place Eowyn avoided. North of the sanctuary, beyond a round hill covered in brown heather, lay a small lake called Loch Chiar, the Dark Lake. Not because its waters were black, but because the sky reflected in it with such depth that it seemed to have no end. On its eastern bank sat an old half-sunken boat. On the western side, a leaning willow touched the water with branches like weary fingers. When Eowyn was a child, before he came as an apprentice, he had lived near there with his mother. His father had died long before, on a crossing between islands. His mother, who knew old songs and country remedies, had taught him to listen to the murmur of bees to know whether rain was coming, and to tell the good mint from the one that numbed the tongue. But a late fever had taken her during a harvest moon, and after her death, Eowyn was brought by distant relatives to Knocknarealt, where Moiraine took him in. He rarely spoke of that time by the lake, not even to himself. He had shut those memories away the way one shuts a window before a storm. Not violently, simply firmly. One afternoon, with a light wind moving across the land, Muireann sent him to gather willow bark and a handful of meadowsweet in the area around Loch Chiar. Eowyn felt something tighten in his chest. "I could go to the eastern stream," he suggested. "It grows there too." "It grows less there," Muireann replied without severity. "And that is not what you must gather today." She said nothing more. He took the basket, took the lantern, and set out. The clouds moved low. The daylight had that pale color of quiet autumns, when the world seems wider because everything makes less sound. As he climbed the heather hill, Ian noticed that the lantern was warmer than usual. Not hot, just softly warm like a stone that has held the sun. He descended toward the lake. The water lay still, touched only by small circles where an insect dared settle. The willow still leaned, the boat remained half sunk, and still standing a few steps from the shore was the ruined cabin where he had once lived with his mother, a rectangle of low stones, roof collapsed, the doorway no longer a door but a dark opening split open to moss. Eowyn stopped. He had not returned there since the day they took him away. He drew a deep breath. The air smelled of cold water, wet leaves, and old wood. And in that scent there was still something else, a shadow of peat smoke, the almost impossible trace of time drying on a cord, the murmur of oat bread on hot stone. It was not real, he knew that, and yet it was there. He walked toward the cabin. Every step made thin branches crack beneath his boots. Crossing the broken threshold, he ducked his head without thinking, as if he still feared striking the low lintel. Inside there was only gentle ruin. Ferns where the pallet had once stood, a fallen wall, a broken bowl half buried in dirt, and in one corner the old iron hook where his mother had hung a little lamp when she sewed in winter. The sight came to him with such clarity he had to brace himself against the wall. His mother sewing by that small light, the needle going in and out, her fingers quick and calm, her voice telling him a story about a seal that shed its skin under the moon and walked as a woman, the slow simmer of barley broth, rain outside, warmth within. Éowyn closed his eyes. A deep pain moved through him. Not sharp, not new. A very old sorrow he had learned to fold with care. The way one folds a precious cloth to keep it out of sight. And when he opened his eyes again, he saw that the lantern's flame had changed. It was not brighter, it was gentler. The light spilled over the broken stones with a softness that seemed impossible for iron and fire. It did not force the eye, it did not intrude. It simply rested there, touching the empty room like a hand that knows how much absence weighs. Then Éowyn understood, if only a little, what Muireann had meant. To remain, not to heal at once. Not to turn into song what is still and not to hurry the step. Only to remain where no one wishes to stay for long. He crouched and gathered the fallen willow bark near the wall, then the meadowsweet from a wetter patch close to the water. He did it slowly, without fleeing, without forcing himself to cry, and without preventing it. When one tear fell onto his fingers, the lantern kept shining just the same, as though that were not a failure, but an old form of rain. He returned to the sanctuary with the basket full and his chest heavy with tiredness. Muireann was waiting beside the common fire, where yarrow and nettle were steeping in an infusion. She looked at the bark, the flowers, and then at the boy's face. "You've come back changed," she said. Éowyn sat across from her. The lantern rested between them. "I went into the cabin. I know. I didn't want to. I know." He held the edge of the warm cup. The light did not make anything disappear. Muireann inclined her head. "No." But it seemed, he searched for the word, compassionate. The druid smiled with her usual calm. "There are lights that help us see, others that warn, others that protect. This one accompanies without violence." The boy lowered his gaze to the flame. "So it does not light the roads." "Sometimes it does," she said. "But above all, it lights the wounded place, so it does not have to stay alone in the dark." That night the wind moved through the stones of the circle with a voice almost like the sea. Éowyn slept badly, though not bitterly. He dreamed of his mother walking beside the lake at dawn, seen from behind. She was not leaving him. She was not calling him either. She only walked on with a basket on her arm. And around her, the air was filled with the lantern's humble golden light. When he woke, he did not feel relief. He felt something more and more delicate, as though some inner door, long closed, had opened by no more than the thickness of a dry leaf. And behind it there was not terror. There was air, the quiet lamp. In the days that followed, life at Knocknareallt went on in its usual rhythm. Fennel seeds were ground for winter infusions. Bundles of mugwort were hung from the beams. The apprentices swept leaves from the stone circle before the first rite of mist. The villagers climbed the hill with small offerings. Milk, dark bread, spun wool, late apples, a well-carved wooden spoon. The world kept doing what the world knows how to do when no one tries to force it. Move slowly toward the next season. But something in Éowyn had changed. It was not a visible transformation. His hands were the same hands. His voice remained low. He still forgot from time to time the proper order of certain roots for drying. He still stepped slightly aside when one of the other apprentices argued with too much enthusiasm. And yet now he noticed things that had escaped him before. One morning he went with Branna, the youngest of the group, to fetch water from the western spring. Branna was quick at everything, climbing hills, laughing, getting angry, learning songs by heart. That day she spoke without stopping about a fox she had seen by the edge of the forest, so red it seemed made of the very fire of sunset. Eowyn listened with half a smile, carrying the lantern unlit in the brightness of the sun. Halfway there, Branna suddenly fell silent. It was only a few quiet steps, but Eowyn sensed something in the way she tightened her grip on the bucket handle. The smile had vanished. Her shoulders, usually loose and easy, had gone rigid. "Does your hand hurt?" he asked. Branna looked at him, startled. "No." They kept walking. "Then something else hurts," Eowyn said before thinking. She frowned, more out of defense than anger. "You do not need to speak like Muirin." Eowyn lowered his head slightly. "I didn't mean to." Branna exhaled. The bucket bumped softly against her leg. "My brother has gone south with some traders," she admitted at last. "He says he'll be back by the snow or before, but he always said that when he went out fishing on a long tide and once he was gone for nearly a full moon." Eowyn nodded. He did not search for a wise answer. He had none. The lantern hung from his hand. Even unlit, it seemed to hold a faint warmth. "I don't know how to wait without becoming furious," Branna continued. "I get angry at him for leaving, then I get angry at myself for being angry. Maybe both things can sit together," said Eowyn. Branna let out a small, incredulous laugh. "That really does sound like an old druid. Or like someone who is tired of fighting everything he feels." She glanced at him. "You didn't used to talk like that." "I didn't used to listen well." They reached the spring. The water rose clear among moss-covered stones, with wild cress growing around it. As they filled the buckets, neither of them said anything. They did not need to. On the way back, Branna walked a little more slowly, but also more lightly. And Eowyn understood that the lantern's light did not only touch old ruins or houses in mourning. It also taught him to recognize those small, ordinary hurts that people hide inside quick words or crooked silences. As the weeks passed, the boy grew more attentive. Not sadder, more attentive. He saw an old man pause at a stone in the road because his wife had once liked to sit there. He saw a mother keep her eyes on the horizon a little too long when her son drove the cattle far from home. He saw a child fall silent at a certain flute melody because it had been played for him at bedtime when he was very small. Grief, he discovered, did not always wear dark clothes. Sometimes it smiled. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it served soup. And still, now and then, it asked for a quiet light. Near Samain, when the air began to smell more of smoke than grass, Muirin announced that each apprentice would spend one night in solitary vigil as part of the season's observances. It would not be a test of endurance, she said, nor a search for grand visions, only a full night in the company of the earth, the sky, and oneself. Eowyn was assigned the hill of Tulaig Ban, a rounded rise from which one could see, if the weather was clear, the lights of 3 distant villages and the dark line of the sea. He was to bring a blanket, water, some bread, and the lantern. He was to remain awake until dawn, to listen. He climbed at dusk. The world was covered in blue-grey light. The clouds opened here and there to reveal early stars. The heather, dry now, in many places brushed his ankles with a faint whisper. He found the flat stone where other watchers had kept vigil before him and settled there with the blanket over his shoulders. He lit the lantern. The flame answered at once, small and steady. Up there he had no company but the wind, a wind still mild for late autumn, carrying the scent of peat, distant sea, and apples laid away for storage. Eowyn ate a piece of oat bread and drank water. Then he remained in silence, as he had been asked to do. There is a peculiar way that hours of stillness pass. At first one hears concrete things, An owl, a branch, a dog very far away, the creak of one's own clothing when moving. Then, if one does not flee, deeper layers begin to appear. The space between sounds, the way cold travels through the fingers before reaching the wrist, the weight of one's own thoughts when they repeat themselves too often. Eowyn watched the flame. He remembered the cabin beside Loch Ciar. He remembered a wooden spoon with a crack in the handle. He remembered his mother wrapping his wet feet in warm cloth when he came in soaked. And he also remembered the day of her fever. Not the whole illness, only fragments, a fogged window. The bitter smell of a decoction boiled down too far. The feeling that the adults were speaking in a nearby room with voices that dared not be clear. It hurt, not violently, like a tide returning to an old rock. He held the lantern across his knees. The light traced the edges of his fingers, the worn seams of his sleeve, the leather buckle at his belt. And once again, that strange kindness lived in the glow. It did not ask him to forget. It did not ask him to move on. It only offered him a place where he could look without being swallowed by sorrow. Then he spoke aloud, though no one could hear him. I do not remember your whole face when you were ill. The wind kept moving, and I feel guilty for that. The flame trembled only a little. I remember your voice telling stories more clearly than I remember your face in those last days, as if my memory chose the gentle parts and left out what was hardest. He looked into the darkness around him. The first mists were beginning to gather over the low meadows. I don't know whether that is betrayal or mercy. He did not expect an answer, but speaking it brought him an almost physical relief, small as loosening a cord that had been tied too tightly around a sack. He stayed there a long time, speaking now and then, not always of his mother, also of himself, of the shame he felt when he did not understand a symbol the others grasped at once, of the fear of not being worthy of the learning, of the exhaustion of seeming serene even when inside he was nothing but slow confusion. Each confession was brief, nothing solemn, nothing dramatic, like setting stones down on the ground one by one so as not to keep carrying them. In the middle of the night, the mist rose higher. The village lights disappeared. The world shrank to a few steps of heather, the stone where he sat and the golden circle of the lantern. Beyond that there was only moving grey whiteness. Eowyn felt a shiver, not of fear, but of that quiet vulnerability that comes with knowing oneself small among immense things. Then it seemed to him that he heard footsteps. He did not leap up. He only lifted his head. From the mist emerged a figure wrapped in a pale mantle. It was an old woman, or so it seemed from the way the light touched her white hair. She did not walk as villagers walk in the cold, hunched and hurried. She walked as if the air itself recognized her. She stopped a short distance from the stone and looked at Eowyn with calm eyes. He did not speak at once. In those lands, it was known that on thin nights between seasons, the veil between what is seen and what is barely remembered could grow very slight. Not every meeting asked to be named. The woman looked at the lantern. "You have learned not to use it as a weapon," she said. Her voice was soft, almost as low as wind in reeds. Eowyn swallowed. "I didn't know it could be used that way. Many lights are, to force, expose, demand, to tear open at once what needs to unfold slowly." She took one step closer. The mist turned around her without quite touching her. Tenderness also gives light. The young are slow to believe that. Something in Eowyn's chest tightened in a strange way, not with alarm, with recognition. There was something in that presence that reminded him of the stories his mother had told about women of the seed, guardians of springs, old women who were not only old women. "Who are you?" he asked at last. The figure smiled, and in that smile there was mist, shoreline, old moonlight, and barrow grass. One who has watched many lamps be lost and found. Then she pointed down the hill beneath the fog. Do not fear what you cannot remember whole. Memory protects as well. It veils what would wound too deeply if it burned all the time. What matters is not seeing every detail. What matters is knowing how to love what is no longer here without tearing yourself apart in the loving. Moisture gathered in Éowyn's eyes. Sometimes I think that if it stops hurting, I will forget her. No, said the woman. Pain is not the only form of fidelity. The lantern gave off a broader, more golden light. The mist around them seemed filled with fine motes, as if the air itself had remembered the dust of summer. When the time comes to lose it, she added, do not believe that the light has died. Éowyn wanted to ask what she meant, but a shift in the wind pushed the mist thickly between them, only for an instant. When it cleared, the figure was gone. There was only silence, and the lantern and the hill breathing under the night. Éowyn did not move for a very long time. He did not know whether he had seen a woman from the village, an ancient spirit, a vision born of weariness, or something that needed no name at all. He did not try to decide. Some things, he understood, yield their truth more fully when they are not seized too quickly. Dawn came without spectacle. First, the mist turned pearl white. Then the east took on the color of pale blue milk. Then very faintly a band of pale gold appeared behind the fields. Owen extinguished the lantern when the first bird sang. When he descended the hill, his body was stiff, but his soul was strangely calm. Muireann was waiting for him with a cup of hot broth. He sat by the fire and held the bowl in both hands. I saw someone in the mist, he said. Muireann showed no surprise. The old hills are not always empty. She said that when the time comes to lose the lantern, I should not believe the light has died. Muireann let those words rest between them. Then listen carefully to that, she said. Some warnings come wrapped in comfort. Éowyn looked toward the doorway where the lantern hanging from the post seemed to contain nothing extraordinary. Dark iron, greenish glass, a small tool among many. And yet, looking at it, he felt gratitude. Not for what it revealed, but for the way it remained, what the light reveals. Winter kept advancing like a boat that knows on its own the direction of the current. The mornings dawned silvered with frost. The puddles in the sanctuary yard gathered a thin film of ice that cracked under boots with a delicate sound. The trees were stripped bare, and the crows, more visible now, looked like black fruit in the high branches. With the cold came more visits to Knock Narealt, not for grand illnesses, but for the small wearinesses winter draws out of the joints of body and heart. An old woman with hands locked in pain, a shepherd unable to sleep since the death of his old dog, a little girl who had begun to stammer after a night storm. The druids listened, prepared poultices, infusions, measured words, timely silences. Éowyn often accompanied Muireann with the lantern in hand. It was during one of those visits that the unexpected happened. They had gone down to the coastal village of Dún Liath, where the houses faced the sea with a mixture of resignation and affection. In the last hut at the northern end lived Ailbe, a weaver who had gradually lost her sight without ever losing the habit of working wool with infallible fingers. Now she wove simpler ribbons with the help of her granddaughter, and she knew each visitor by the sound of their steps before hearing their voice. Muireann had brought her a preparation of eyebright and some caraway seeds for her stomach. Éowyn held the lantern because Ailbe had once said that the light from that object made no noise, and she liked having it near, though she could no longer see it. The afternoon was damp. A sea wind drove little needles of rain against the stone walls. Inside the house, the loom stood covered with a cloth. Ailbe's granddaughter, a rosy-cheeked girl named Nessa was stirring oats over the fire. Ailbe reached into the air with one hand when Éowyn sat near her. "You came," she said. "Yes, Mother Ailbe. You brought the quiet lamp." He smiled. "I did." The old woman tilted her head as though listening to something distant. "Today it is sadder." Éowyn looked at the flame. He did not know whether a blind woman could read the light better than he could. He was beginning to think she could. "Maybe because it's raining," he said. Ailbe laughed, toothless and warm. "No, child. Rain never makes it sad. Rain makes it ancient." Muireann began speaking with Nessa by the fire, asking about provisions, about the little sight the old woman still had, about the pain in her knees. Éowyn remained seated near the bench where Ailbe still spun from habit even when no wool lay in her hands. The weaver spoke in a low voice. "There is a sorrow in this house that is not mine." Éowyn turned his head toward Nessa. The girl was stirring the pot with the right movements, but too stiffly. "You can feel it?" he asked. "I hear it in the way she sets down the spoon," said Ailbe, "in the fact that she does not hum, in how she avoids the left side of the room." Éowyn looked more closely. It was true. Every time Nessa moved, she curved away from a particular corner near the covered loom. He held the lantern with both hands and felt a deeper warmth than usual in its base. When they were leaving, with Muireann already wrapped in her mantle, Éowyn stepped toward Nessa. "May I ask you something?" he said. She raised her eyes. "Yes." "Why do you never go near the loom?" The girl went still. Outside, rain kept tapping at the stones. "I don't know," she lied at first. The lantern cast a faint glow over the cloth that covered the loom. Nessa followed that light with her eyes. Her face, still so young, softened. "My mother died there," she whispered. Éowyn did not reply. "Not on the loom itself. She fainted while working, fell beside the bench. I was here. I thought she had fallen asleep because she had been tired for days. And since then," she tried to finish, but the sentence caught in her throat. Muireann had turned back, silently, without interrupting. Nessa rested one hand on the table. "I cannot bear to look at that corner, but I do not want to take the loom away either. It was hers, her hands are still in it. Not truly, I know, but sometimes objects keep a habit of presence," Muireann said gently. "And that, too, has weight." Nessa nodded. Her eyes were full of tears held back far too long. Éowyn lifted the lantern slightly. The light did not fall on the young woman's face. It fell on the avoided corner, on the bench, on the cloth, on the stone floor. And it did it with such tenderness that even Ailbe, from her seat, straightened as if she felt someone kind entered the room. Nessa drew a deep breath. "I never wanted to look there at night," she confessed. "In daylight, perhaps, but not at night." "You do not have to do it alone," Éowyn said. The girl looked at him, surprised, as if the idea of companionship in that act had never occurred to her. Muireann nodded. "Uncover the loom," she said. With trembling hands, Nessa pulled the cloth away. Beneath it appeared the polished wood, the heddle comb, the taut threads left half-worked for months. Nothing terrible, nothing strange, and yet the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Nessa took one step, then another. The lantern lit the edge of the bench. A shuttle forgotten there. A strand of blue-grey wool still caught between two threads. The young woman began to cry in silence. She did not collapse. She did not cry out. She simply wept with that deep kind of tears that finally find a safe place to fall. Éowyn held the light without moving. Muireann laid a hand on the girl's shoulder. Ailbe, with her face turned toward the scene invisible to her eyes, began to sing very softly, an old cradle tune no louder than a thread of voice. When the weeping eased, Nessa sat down at the loom bench. She ran her fingers over the wood. I thought that if I touched it again, the pain would be worse, she said. Muireann answered, Sometimes pain worsens when it is forced to wait behind the door. Nessa let out a long breath. It hurts differently now. Éowyn lowered his gaze to the lantern. Old Eilbe was smiling. That is what the quiet lamp does, she murmured. It does not tear the house down. It only opens the window. As they left Dún Liath, the sky had begun to clear. Between the broken clouds appeared a crescent moon, thin as a silver spoon. Éowyn walked beside Muireann along the coastal path. Below them the sea breathed against the rocks. I understand more and more, he said. What do you understand? That not all healing looks like closing a wound. Sometimes it looks like sitting beside it until it no longer feels cast out of the world. Muireann looked at him with calm approval. That is difficult wisdom, because it offers less pride. Éowyn gave a faint smile. Pride? Many wish to be the one who saves, the one who fixes, the one who drives sorrow away with a single word. Few accept being the one who accompanies without taking possession of the process. They walked on. The lantern hung from his hand, rocking soft glimmers over the frosted grass. The broken lantern, the crescent moon passed. The full moon came, then the waning moon, and with it came a night of fierce wind descending from the hills with long-throated roars. The sanctuary doors creaked. Bare branches struck the walls. The apprentices checked bindings, stored vessels, covered herbs. Éowyn left the lantern hanging in the central shelter while he helped secure a light roof near the medicinal garden. They worked under cold gusts until late into the night. When at last the wind eased a little and each returned to his own tasks, Éowyn went back to the shelter. The lantern was gone. He stared at the empty hook, unable for a moment to understand what he was seeing. Then he looked at the floor, the nearby table, the shelves, the half-open door. He went out into the yard. The past rain had left dark mud and leaves stuck to the stones. No lantern, a clean, sudden wave of alarm moved through him. It was not just any object. He called Branna, the other apprentices, Muireann. They searched with torches in the sheds behind the larger stones near the forest. They followed the confused traces of the wind. Nothing. Perhaps a gust had torn it from the hook and thrown it down the slope. Perhaps someone had sheltered it without saying so. Perhaps. The search lasted until the night grew too thick to continue. Éowyn remained alone in the yard, staring into the darkness where so many times the lantern had drawn a gentle circle. Muireann came to him and laid a dry mantle over his shoulders. We will find it or we will not find it, she said calmly, but remember what you were told in the mist. Éowyn clenched his jaw. I am not ready to lose it. No one ever is entirely. I still need it. Muireann held his gaze. That may be true, and it may also be true that its work in you has already begun to become your own. He did not answer. The grief of the possible loss came too quickly, too whole. That night he barely slept. He listened to the lingering wind brushing the walls, the soft snore of a companion, the rain returning in short intervals. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the empty hook. At dawn, he went down the slope alone, determined to keep searching. The ground was soaked. Ferns beaten flat by winter clung to the earth. Among the undergrowth, he found broken branches, an overturned bucket, a piece of cloth snagged in thorn, no sign of the lantern. He descended farther toward a little ravine where seasonal water ran. Then he saw it, not the lantern itself. A light, far below among thorns and stones, there was a faint golden glow, so soft it might almost have been mistaken for a trick of dawn. Éowyn climbed down carefully, pushing wet branches aside, slipping once in the mud. He reached a hollow among rocks where the water formed a shallow pool. There lay the lantern. The glass was broken on one side, the iron was bent, the door had come loose. And yet in the middle of that damage, the flame was still alive. Not high, not desperate, simply alive. Éowyn knelt in the mud. Relief struck him first. Then came another feeling, harder to name. The lantern was wounded, violated. It could no longer hang the same way. Perhaps it could not be carried to vigils anymore. Perhaps it would not survive another storm. The loss was not total, but it was real. He lifted it carefully in both hands. The flame, instead of complaining against the cold air, leaned toward the broken glass and cast its glow onto something small trapped among the stones of the pool, a nest blown there by the wind. It was a robin's nest, nearly undone, made of moss, feathers, and threads of wool. There were no eggs inside, no life, only the empty shape of what had once been shelter. Eowyn looked at that tiny ruin under the light of the broken lantern, and then he understood. Even broken, it still illuminated the vulnerable with tenderness. It had not ceased to be itself. It had not ceased to do its work. He held it against his chest for a moment, not caring about the mud or the damp. Then he climbed the slope slowly, carrying the lantern as one carries a tired friend. Muireann was preparing a mixture of resin, wax, and flint dust when Eowyn returned with the broken lantern. She showed no alarm. She only moved the dried herbs aside to make room on the table. The boy set the object between them. The shattered glass left the air exposed to the flame. The metal was bent near the base. The upper ring drooped. "It is still lit," Eowyn said, as if he still could not quite believe it. Muireann watched the flame for several long, quiet moments. "Yes. Can it be repaired?" She tilted the lantern slightly, examining the break. "Some parts can. Others will never be as they were." Eowyn placed both hands on the table. "I do not want it to change." Muireann looked up at him. There was no hardness in her eyes, only the kind of truth that does not need to raise its voice. "It already has." He lowered his head. The druid continued, "And still its light remains. Sometimes that is the repair." They worked together all morning. They straightened the mainframe with patience, cleaned the mud from the joints, replaced 2 small copper pieces, but the glass on the right side could not be restored. None of the spare pieces fit well enough, and Muireann chose not to force it. "Leave it open," she said. "It has learned another way to breathe." Eowyn ran a cloth over the blackened base. "Won't it go out more easily?" "Perhaps." "Then it will be more fragile." "Yes." That acceptance hurt him a little, and yet, when he looked at the flame through the broken opening, he saw that the light now escaped in a different way, freer, less contained. It drew softer edges over the table and over Muireann's sleeve. What remains? By late afternoon, the druid asked him to carry the lantern to the sacred well of Tobar Fionn, a spring protected by white stones at the foot of an ancient hawthorn. There people often left small ribbons, bone beads, or old coins in thanks for relief received. The task was simple: remove withered offerings, clear away leaves, leave fresh water in a bowl for the birds of the forest. Eowyn agreed and set out. Winter had cleared the air. Everything looked quietly precise. The black branches drew delicate filigrees against the pale sky. The ground was hard in the shadowed places. Moss shone a deep green where the low sun reached it. He arrived at the well before dusk. Tobar Fionn was not large. The water rose between 2 smooth stones and fell into a circular basin where the hawthorn and the sky were reflected. Around it were ribbons tied to branches, faded by rain and time, yet still moving with such gentleness that they looked like prayers in no hurry. Eowyn set the lantern on a flat stone and went to work. He removed rotted leaves, cleaned the spring's edge with a heather brush, untied 2 ribbons too worn to remain and buried them nearby as was the custom. Then he filled the little bowl for the birds. By the time he finished, the day was already dissolving into dark blue. He lit the lantern. The light came through the broken side and laid a double reflection on the spring water, one steady through the unbroken glass, another trembling and free through the opening. Eowyn sat for a while beside the hawthorn. There was something deeply peaceful about that place, not only because of the water, also because of the sense of continuity. So many people had passed through there before him with small griefs and great ones, with awkward gratitude with the hands of child, woman, elder, fisherman, shepherd. So many hopes had been left in ribbons, bowls, stones, and coins. And the spring kept rising without exhaustion, as if the earth knew how to receive without ever wholly tiring. As he watched the light in the water, he heard footsteps. They were not stealthy. They were slow and tired. A man emerged from the path wrapped in a dark cloak, his hair wet from thawed frost. After a moment, Eowyn recognized him. It was Senan, a tanner from the lower village who rarely came to the sanctuary and even less often to the well. He was a broad man with a deep voice, used to leather, salt, lime, and silence. His wife had died 4 years earlier. Since then, he was seen working and enduring and little more. Senan stopped when he saw the boy. "I did not mean to interrupt," he said. "You are not interrupting," Eowyn answered. The man looked at the well, then at the broken lantern. "Your lamp has been damaged." The wind knocked it down. Senan nodded as though that explained more than the object itself. He stepped closer to the spring but offered nothing. He only stood looking at the water. A while passed before he spoke again. "My daughter is getting married in spring." Eowyn waited. "Everyone says that is a good thing," Senan continued, "and it is. The young man is kind. He has land, clean hands. He does not drink too much. My daughter looks at him with joy. Everything is good." The last words fell into the air with a strange heaviness. "And yet," said Eowyn softly. Senan let the breath leave his nose. "And yet I cannot feel joy without feeling something else. Her mother should be here for this. She would know what linen to keep, what songs to sing, how to prepare the chest. I do not know those things. I will do what I can. But the house sounds different since they began speaking of the wedding." The man lowered his head. His large hands, roughened by labor, hung motionless at his sides. "I thought I was done mourning her," he murmured. 4 years. 4 years, and now this comes, and it is as if the grief had been sitting in a corner, waiting. Eowyn took up the lantern and raised it slightly. The open light touched the well's surface. The tanner's tired face, his calloused hands. "Perhaps it was not waiting to wound you," he said. "Perhaps it was waiting to remind you how much love lived in what you shared." Senan closed his eyes for a moment. "That sounds beautiful when you say it." "I do not know if it is beautiful. I only think some grief returns, not because we are going backward, but because life changes shape and misses those who should be here to see it." The tanner opened his eyes and looked at the flame. "The broken lamp gives better light than many whole ones." Eowyn smiled faintly. "That is what I am learning." Senan remained beside the well a while longer. At last he removed from his neck a thin braided strip of leather, simple and finely worked, and tied it to a low branch of the hawthorn, "so that she may see, wherever she is, that the girl is marrying a good man," he said. Then he left. Eowyn stayed there until the cold made him shiver. When he returned to the sanctuary, he carried within him a new understanding. Pain did not move in a straight line toward some clean ending. It moved like the tide, returning to different parts of the shore, according to the moons of a life. And that did not mean failure. It only meant that love leaves deep marks, the shape of care. The heart of winter passed. The hardest frosts came and went. The flocks stayed close. The sea changed its face many times, at times dark and dense as molten metal, at times bright beneath a weak sun that barely warmed but made the backs of the waves shine. At the sanctuary, the stores diminished and then little by little ceased to worry them so much, because in the air there began to stir that smallest change that announces the return of the clear season. It was not spring yet, only a promise. One morning while cleaning clay jars by the doorway, Owen heard the first skylark. The song was brief, almost a question, but it lifted his heart. Muireann came out of the main hut carrying a new grey wool mantle. "Today you will go to Loch Kiar," she said. Owen looked up. He no longer felt that immediate tightening of earlier months. He felt respect and a deep, quiet emotion. To gather something? To leave something? She held out the mantle. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in linen. "It is for you," she added, "and for the one who already knows how to receive it." Owen took the bundle. He asked nothing more. He hung the broken lantern from his wrist and set out. The path to the lake was changing. Beneath the wet grass, new green tips were already showing. The hawthorns were still bare, but their branches held a living tension, like a breath being kept. The earth smelled different, less asleep, more profound. He climbed the heather hill, now brown and grey, and descended to the shore. Loch Kiar lay still as polished stone. The sky gave it a dark blue colour, almost violet in places. The leaning willow was still there, the half-sunken boat too, and the ruined cabin, small against the wide serenity of the lake. Owen approached without haste. He went inside. The interior was the same and not the same. There was more moss, fewer visible remains. A patch of early bluebells was opening beside the old hearth. Time had not ceased to work, but it no longer seemed his enemy. It was simply the great weaver, patient and continuous, who takes even abandoned houses and turns them into nest, root, lichen, and memory. He knelt where his mother's pallet had once stood and opened the linen bundle. Inside was a new wick, a small disc of greenish glass cut with soft imperfections, and a short note written by Muireann in firm strokes on smooth bark. "What breaks may teach another way to let the light pass through. What is honoured may keep burning." Owen exhaled slowly. He understood at once. It was not about replacing the whole broken side of the lantern, only about setting that small new piece of glass over part of the opening, leaving another part open to the air. A partial repair. A visible acceptance of what had been lost and what continued. He worked there on the floor of the old cabin. He fixed the piece in place with the fine wire from the bundle, changed the worn wick, straightened the loose door once again. When he finished, the lantern was different from what it had first been, and different too from what it had been after the fall. One side was now mixed, new glass, open gap, old metal, visible scar. He lit it. The flame rose calmly. Part of the light came filtered through the greenish glass, another part, free, through the portion still open. Both joined on the floor in a shape so soft and broken that it seemed to him more beautiful than the earlier perfection. Owen smiled, not a wide smile, one of those nearly secret smiles that appear when something within finally finds its natural posture. He remained there a while in silence. Then he spoke, as he had on the Vigil hill. "I do not remember everything," he said, to the empty room, to the lake, to the memory of his mother. "And I think I no longer need to remember everything in order to love you well." The lantern breathed its light across the stones. "You will hurt me sometimes, in winter, at other people's weddings, in songs and the smell of time drying. But I do not want to keep turning away from that as if it were an enemy wound." His eyes filled. "You are home, and in some way you still are." The words did not dissolve the sadness. They transformed it into something livable, like a room that has been closed for a long time until someone opens the window and lets fresh air in, though the furniture remains the same. He left the cabin and went to the water's edge. The lake was so still that it clearly reflected the sky and the lantern in his hand. For an instant, the light seemed doubled on the surface, one above, one below, both gentle, both real in their own way. Then he saw something move. Not in the deep water. Near the reeds, a small creature stumbled among the wet growth. It was a late-born fawn, perhaps orphaned by winter or merely separated from its herd. Its coat was still dull, its legs thin, and its expression alert, frightened but not lost to panic. At the sight of it, Éowyn froze. The fawn hesitated. The lantern's light fell over it without harshness. It did not blind it. It did not push it. It only illuminated the mud around its hooves and a tangle of low branches where an old length of net cord, dragged there from who knew where, had trapped one foreleg. Éowyn understood at once. He approached very slowly, speaking in a low voice, not so the animal would understand words, but so it would hear cadence. The fawn trembled, but did not struggle. Perhaps from exhaustion, perhaps from the gentle way the light revealed the problem without making it more terrible. The boy set the lantern on a stone and crouched. His fingers worked at the wet cord. It took several minutes to loosen it because the knot had tightened with mud and time. At last it gave way. The leg came free. The animal backed away 2 paces. It stood looking at him. Éowyn saw the reddish mark, shallow, not grave. "There now," he murmured. The fawn turned its head toward the forest, then looked back at him one last time and slipped into the reeds with that strange lightness young creatures possess. Éowyn remained kneeling by the water. A clear, simple, almost luminous feeling came over him. The lantern did not only teach him how to look at human pain, it taught him how to approach all fragility with less violence. Not to pull, not to tear, not to hurry the rescue. First to see where the knot was tightening. It seemed to him then that everything he had learned in those months finally gathered into a single thread. It was not only a lesson about sorrow, it was a lesson about care. He returned to the sanctuary at dusk. Muireann was in the garden, turning the soil beside the first wild chive shoots. When she saw the lantern, she noticed at once the new glass and the preserved opening. "You understood," she said. Éowyn stepped closer and showed her the light. "Now it lets through 2 kinds of brightness. Like many souls," she replied. He told her then about the fawn. Muireann listened without interrupting. When he finished, the druid leaned her hoe aside. "And what did you learn from that?" Éowyn thought before answering. "That when something hurts, we want to pull hard at the knot to end it quickly. But sometimes that only wounds it more. First we have to look at how it is tangled. What part is holding? What part is tightening? What part can be loosened without breaking?" Muireann nodded with quiet satisfaction. "That is a good lesson for a druid, and for almost any living being. The light kept as craft." The following days brought gentle rain, kind mud, and shoots everywhere. The sanctuary filled with the work of the new season, clearing gutters, opening ground for planting, checking the hives, preparing lighter salves. The villagers began to speak of nets, lambing, and roads becoming passable again. One afternoon, Branna returned from the village with news. "My brother is back," she shouted, nearly running into the yard. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes radiant. "With snow or before?" Éowyn asked. "Before," she answered, laughing. "And with an absurd knife he swears he bought from a trader 3 islands away. It's ugly. But he is whole, that is enough for me." Éowyn felt joy for her, a calm joy without the old inward sting. That same week, Sinan came up to the sanctuary with a piece of worked leather as a gift for Muireann, and a roll of fine linen for the wedding rites. He still looked tired, yes, but no longer bent beneath a mute sorrow, rather accompanied by it in some new way. He even spoke a little more of his wife, and doing so did not darken the day. It made it deeper. and Nessa, the weaver's granddaughter, sent a hand-woven ribbon in blue and grey to hang beside Tobar Fionn. "I have gone back to working in the afternoons," her message said, "and sometimes I cry while I weave, but I no longer run from the bench." Everything seemed to answer the same slow music, not the music of everything being fixed, but the music of many things finding their way to keep breathing. One clear night when the moon was round and toads had begun singing in the wet hollows, Éowyn sat alone outside the apprentice's hut. He hung the lantern from a low stake and watched its light mingle with the milky glow of the moon. He thought about loss, about memory, about tenderness, about what he had feared, about what he would still fear many times in life, because no one ever fully stops fearing the loss of what is loved. But he also thought this: even what is broken can become a truer lamp. And for the first time since childhood, the image of his mother came to him, not tied to the last winter or to fever. It came laughing as she blew on a spoon that was too hot. It came combing her hair by the doorway with a bone comb. It came singing under her breath while mending a sleeve. It was not a farewell. It was a gentle visit from memory when it no longer arrives, only in the shape of a wound. Éowyn closed his eyes and let that calm fill him. Beside him, the lantern burned without haste. Spring came at last in its humble way of conquering the world. Not all at once. Leaf by leaf, song by song, shoot by shoot. The ash trees began to veil themselves in fine green. The springs found a stronger voice. Newly lambed ewes sought sunny corners. The paths filled with fresh tracks, and the mornings once again smelled of turned earth and waking herbs. At Knockna Realt, there was a different lightness in the air. After the months of gathering inward, the body itself seemed eager to stretch outward again. Blankets were hung in the sun. Old ashes were emptied from hearths. Vessels were washed in the stream until they gleamed. The apprentices resumed longer walks to identify the first useful plants of the season. One morning, Muireann asked Éowyn to accompany her to the Hazel Clearing, a place east of the sanctuary where small blessings were held for those beginning a new stage of life. There, at the end of the waxing moon, several families would gather. Among them, Senan and his daughter, whose wedding was drawing near. When they arrived, the grass was scattered with primroses. The hazel leaves, still translucent with newness, let through a soft green light. Muireann told Ian where to place the bowl of water, the flowering hawthorn branches, and the smooth stone where juniper incense would burn. He also set the lantern in place, not in the center, but slightly to one side, where it could offer its light without imposing itself upon the morning. "You would have set it right here before," Muireann observed, pointing at the altar. Éowyn smiled. "Before, I thought the light had to stand at the center of everything. And now I think sometimes it is enough for it to be nearby." The druid looked at him with silent appreciation. That same day, after the preparations were done, an elderly woman appeared on the path whom Éowyn did not know. She wore a worn blue cloak, carried a hazel staff, and bore a small basket covered in linen. She walked slowly, though not weakly. When she reached the clearing, she greeted Muireann by name. "Many seasons have passed," she said, "and yet I would know you even through the mists of Samain," Muireann replied. The old woman turned her head toward Éowyn. Her eyes were grey and bright. "So this is the boy." Something in the voice, the shape of the face, the way the air itself seemed to listen to her, made the hairs along the back of Éowyn's neck rise softly. She was not the woman from the hill, or not in the same way, but she belonged to that kind of presence that does not need to announce itself. "I am Sorsha of Ash Island," said the old woman. "I bring her butter for Senan's wedding, and a few words for the one who carries that lamp." Éowyn bowed his head respectfully. Sorcia stepped toward the lantern. She passed her fingers near the broken opening and the new glass. "Ah," she murmured. "It is no longer an apprentice's lantern. Now it is a true lantern." Éowyn thought of Branna and could not help smiling. She said something like that too. Sorcia smiled as well. Quick girls often see what matters before cautious men do. Muireann let out a brief laugh. The old woman sat on a low stone and asked for water. Then, while she drank, she beckoned Éowyn closer. "I have heard of you," she said, "of the lake, the loom, the well and the vigil in the mist. These lands have better ears than many people." Éowyn did not know what to say. Sorcia looked at him kindly. "You are beginning to understand that tenderness is not softness." "I think I am." "Then hear this. Some people confuse compassion with letting everything happen. But true tenderness also knows how to hold a boundary. It also knows how to remove with care what is doing harm. It also knows how to say no without shouting and without contempt." Éowyn remembered the fawn and the cord. He nodded. The old woman pointed toward the lantern. "Your light reveals what hurts. Good. But never forget that sometimes what hurts keeps hurting because no one has cut the net, shut the door against the wind, or said enough to a cruel habit. Tenderness does not only contemplate, it also protects." Those words found a place in him already prepared. He will remember. "Do that," said Sorcia, "because the world needs gentle lights, but it also needs steady hands." The final giving back. Senan's daughter was married 3 days later, not at a sanctuary, but in an open field beside a great ash tree where families spread blankets, baskets, and makeshift benches whenever there was cause to gather. The sun appeared through pale clouds. There was the smell of hot bread, fresh butter, and freshly cut birch branches. Éowyn attended with the other apprentices to help however he could. He carried the lantern at Muireann's request, though the ceremony took place by day. "Not every light is less visible in daylight," she had said. The bride wore a simple linen dress with blue embroidery at the cuffs. Her face glowed with feeling. Senan beside her seemed larger and more vulnerable at once, as if pride and absence were walking together inside him without harming one another now. At one moment during the celebration, before the bread was shared, Senan asked for silence. Everyone turned to him. The tanner held in his hands a small piece of blue-grey weaving. "My wife would have known how to say this better," he began. "She always found the exact word and dropped it into a moment the way one adds salt to soup. I do not, so I will only say this." He turned toward his daughter. "Your mother is not here to dress you in linen, nor to tell me to wash my hands properly before greeting your husband's family. But her love is here. It is in everything you learned from her, in the way you tilt your head when you listen, in the shape of your stitches, in the way you make room for others at the table. And it is also here in the fact that her absence hurts a little today. So I'm not going to hide that pain. I feel it. And even while feeling it, I rejoice with all my soul." A silence followed, thick and soft, not uncomfortable, full. Senan's daughter cried. So did he, a little. Then they embraced while several people discreetly looked away with the delicacy one offers true moments. Standing to one side, Éowyn held the lantern and watched the light touch the father's face, the daughter's face, and their clasped hands. And he understood that this was the complete lesson, not to choose between joy and sorrow when both are born of love, to let them sit together. Later there was music, a rough but warm fiddle, a bone flute, soft clapping. Children ran between the blankets. Older women spoke of fabrics and recipes. Men argued over the coming rain and the price of salt. And through it all, the lantern remained lit beneath an ash tree in the full afternoon, a humble reminder that light does not always compete with the sun. Sometimes it simply accompanies what is happening. Weeks later near Beltane, Muireann called Éowyn to the stone circle at dawn. The air smelled of dew and new flowers. On a central stone rested several learning objects already used by others in past cycles. A bronze bell, a pruning blade, a folded cloth, a copper mirror, a hazel wand. The lantern was there too. Éowyn looked at it and felt a mixture of gratitude and anticipated loss. "The end of your cycle with it has come," Muireann said. He nodded slowly. "I knew it had." "And what do you feel?" He thought before speaking. "That I do not want to part from it, and at the same time that perhaps it no longer belongs to me to keep holding it always." Muireann smiled. A good answer. The other apprentices gathered as well, in respectful silence. Branna gave him a look that held both pride and sadness for him. Muireann took the lantern in both hands. "Éowyn of Loch Chiar," she said in her serene voice, "you have kept a light that does not force. You have learned to look at what is wounded without turning away. You have learned that memory may veil out of mercy rather than betrayal. You have learned that what is broken does not fall outside grace. What do you return with this lantern?" Éowyn felt the knot in his throat, but he answered firmly, "I return fear changed into care. I return silence changed into presence. I return a sorrow that no longer asks to be hidden in order to be bearable." Muireann nodded and lowered the lantern toward the central stone. "Then the cycle is fulfilled." For a moment Éowyn thought she would leave it there for another apprentice, but the druid did not let go. Instead she lifted it again and placed it back into his hands. His eyes widened. "Not everything that is given back is set aside," said Muireann. "Some objects are received in order to learn, and others, once learned, are entrusted as craft." Éowyn could not speak. The druid continued, "From today you will no longer carry it as an apprentice. You will carry it when it is needed. To a house in mourning, to a wedding where absence is felt, to a mother who cannot sleep, to an elder afraid of forgetting a face, to whoever needs a light that does not invade." The boy lowered his gaze to the lantern. The scar of new glass shone beneath the dawn. The open gap breathed light. The metal still bore the marks of the blow and of many hands. Yes, it was a real thing. Éowyn closed his fingers around the handle. He did not cry at once. He only felt a quiet, wide, almost sweet responsibility settling into place within him. The dawn began to gild the ancient stones. A cuckoo called far away. The breeze moved the first ash shoots, and the lantern in his hands burned with that same serene flame as always, as though it knew it had not been lost, nor recovered, nor repaired in order to return to what it had been before. It had been transformed, like him. That night, after the day's tasks were finished, Éowyn walked alone to the edge of the sea cliff. The sky was clear, full of young spring stars. Below, the water reflected some of them on its dark, patient surface. He hung the lantern from a firm rock and sat beside it. He thought of the child he had been, of the cabin by the lake, of the boy who avoided certain places for fear that pain would overwhelm him, of the apprentice who believed light had to solve whatever it touched, of the young man he was now who knew at least this: there are wounds that never fully close, but they learn to breathe without fever when someone looks at them with tenderness. The sea wind brushed a lock of hair from his face. He smiled into the darkness, and for the first time in a very long while, the word home no longer meant a place that had been lost. It meant a way of being, a way of holding light, a way of holding sorrow, a way of remaining. The lantern shone on the rock, gilding the edge of the world, without noise, without hurry, asking nothing of the night, only accompanying it.